Hi, Olivia. Great to meet you.
Hi, Jen. Nice to meet you as well.
How are you feeling today?
Gosh, a little nervous, but definitely excited to dig in.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, I'm going to be one of your case interviews today. I'll be in charge in terms of keeping track of time. And there are a couple different sections that we'll likely want to get to. So don't worry at all if I move you along. It's a part of the process and we'll jump in.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So, Olivia, we're going to bring up a slide to be able to go through some of the case. And this one I think is really fun because it's reminiscent of a lot of the work that I do. I spent all my time in consumer products and retail, and this one is on Food Co., which is in the alternative milk space. So I'll just give you a little bit of the background so you can orient yourself to the overall project and case that we're going to be going through. Food Co. is a multi-billion-dollar client with leading brands across the food categories, and they want to enter the alternative milk space. Alternative milk you can define as plant-based dairy alternatives, including almond and soy and oat and coconut, all of those good ingredients. For the purposes of the case, which ingredient is irrelevant. It's just really the alternative milk space. Food Co. would like to partner with Bain to understand how they can enter this space. They have extensive acquisition experience and have identified a number of promising targets. One of them is Smilk. And they are a premium alternative milk business that was started in the Netherlands. Now, of course, as they're looking at Smilk, they want to know, is this the best way to enter into it and how high quality of an overall target it is? So with Smilk, over the last 3 years, they've doubled in profit, which is something that's incredibly attractive to them. They've also expanded to the US and across Europe. They play extensively in the alternative milk space and really have had a lot of success gaining share. So they make up 6% of the alternative drinking milk sales in the US, and they're expected to have 8% share by year 5. Our client is focused only on the US of the alternative milk space and Smilk's US only business. So we don't need to worry as much about Europe.
They expect that Smilk should be able to increase its profit by 6x over the next 5 years.
And so the question for you is, how would you approach assessing whether or not the investment in Smilk is the right way for Food Co. to enter into the alternative milk space? And do you feel that their profit target is achievable?
Awesome. Well, first of all, I'm a big drinker of alternative milk, so excited to dive in here. I'm a big oat milk in my tea type of gal. A few quick questions before we dig in. So I just want to make sure I understand how Smilk makes money. I'm assuming that they go out and purchase their crops from farmers. They bring it back to maybe their factories. They produce it into the actual milk product, and then they sell either directly to grocery stores or maybe through distributor type. Is that right?
That's right. For the purposes of this case, the most important thing for you to understand is that they are a wholesale brand of alternative milk and sell into grocery stores. They also do earn a fair amount of revenue outside of grocery, but for the purposes of this case, we can just focus on that grocery revenue.
Awesome. Okay, we're focused on grocery. Got it. And then other than, I know we're assessing that profit number at 6x. Are there any other specific numbers that we're really looking for here?
Well, it's really about understanding the elements of whether or not that profit number is achievable. So it all comes down to that. And then, of course, the characteristics of whether or not this is going to allow Food Co. to enter into the space successfully. So if they are able to hit the profit number, but it's a really small share, it's not going to give them traction. That's an important element to consider as well.
Well, great. I think I have a handle on what's happening here. Do you mind if I take a minute to quickly gather my thoughts?
Yes, please do.
Great. So when addressing these kind of core questions of A, how is Food Co. going to approach the market? And B, is that 6x profit target reasonable for Smilk? I looked at this across 3 kind of buckets. So first, starting with market, then taking a look at the feasibility of that profit target, and then finally ending with additional acquisition considerations.
Great.
So starting with market, the alternative milk market, I think, is pretty new, right? So is it still growing? If so, how quickly? What does the competitive landscape look like within that? Is it super fragmented and there are a lot of new small players like Milk? Or are there a couple of big dominant players like, the Coke and Pepsi of the alternative milk market? And I wanted to take a look at the feasibility of that profit target. So when we're talking about profit, we're talking about revenue minus cost, right? So if we want to increase revenue, we either have to sell more products or raise the price. Everything about selling more products, how does Milk intend to do that, right? Are they going to go into more grocery stores? Are they going to take up more shelf space within those grocery stores? What do those relationships look like? In terms of price, where does Milk sit in terms of pricing versus competitors? Do they have room to increase the margin a little bit there? And then cost, thinking about, as Milk starts to reach a little bit more scale, is there some economies of scale that they can build in there? So, make more milk cartons on the same machine type of thing. And then finally, thinking about those additional acquisition considerations. So are there any synergies that Foodco and Milk could realize together? Whether it's, Foodco's advanced distribution network, maybe their incredible branding teams. What is the price of Milk, maybe versus other alternative milk companies? What's the culture of Milk versus Foodco, right? Whenever I'm thinking about acquisitions or mergers, I'm thinking about cultural fit. And Milk is this small, young, exciting alternative milk startup. Foodco, I'm assuming, is a big, established kind of corporate beast. How are those two going to work together? And then other options. So what are some other ways that potentially break into the alternative milk market, if not buying milk, right? Is it something that Foodco has the capability to do organically? Are there other acquisition targets that they should be looking more closely at? That sort of thing. But I think first place I'd love to start is with the market. Do we have a little bit of a sense of kind of the size of the alternative milk market in the U.S.?
That's great. I love how you've set up your framework, especially with many of the alternative considerations, outside considerations from profit and cost, as you mentioned. Before we go to market, which I think is a great place to start, and we'll certainly go there. But before we go there, I'd love to hear, without having any of the data at your fingertips, which I realize is uncomfortable, what is your leading hypothesis of whether or not this profit target is achievable and whether or not this might be a good acquisition for Foodco?
Yeah, so when I think about 6x for any company, that's a pretty big number. That being said, Milk is a relatively young company. They're a startup, so 6x in the next 5 years wouldn't be unheard of. They have potential, I think, to be an exciting acquisition target. But before I really recommended them to our client, I would really need to know a little bit more about how they were positioned within the market and then understanding their sort of strategic plan for how they're going to capture that extra value.
Great. So as you narrow it down into the leading drivers to prove or disprove that hypothesis, you're largely saying it's how they're going to execute and how they're positioned in the market.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, as you said, let's jump in and take a look at the market to start. So I'm going to bring up another slide for you.
Great.
So as you said, let's do market first. As you take a look at this, could you describe to me what dynamics pop out to you and what does this chart overall say to you?
Absolutely. So, okay, we're looking at the market overview here, specifically U.S. milk sales. I see we're working with kind of a $25 billion cap here on the y-axis, and we're moving from 10 years ago through 5 years from now. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a span of time here. We've kindly been given the CAGR for the past 5 years, the next 5 years, and at the bottom, I'm seeing alternative milk share percentage. Okay, total versus total milk market, and then traditional milk. Great. Okay, just taking a closer look at these numbers here, I see total milk market is going to stay sort of the same, around 20 billion, right, today versus 5 years from now. And we're looking at the alternative milk share. It's around 10% right now. So, okay, rough math, $2 billion right now. And then in 5 years from now, we predict that it's going to sit at a 20% share. Again, still at that 20 billion total milk market number. So we're at what, 4 billion? So we're moving from 2 billion to 4 billion. That's great. That's really exciting for alternative milk, but we're looking for that kind of 6x number for Smilk, right? So the market's growing by 2x, Smilk needs to grow by 6x. So the market growth alone is not going to be what we need in order to get Smilk those goal numbers.
So glad that you saw that implication from this. Clearly a very exciting market. There's no question that Foodco wants to get into this fast growing segment, but that the market's not going to do it by itself to allow the company to achieve its target. Great. So another thing that you said was is a very important driver to whether or not this is going to be a good acquisition is its overall positioning. So we have a couple of pages on that, and I'm going to flip forward to one additional page. And I'd love you just to tell me a little bit of what you see on this and what it implies in terms of the overall answer that you're driving towards.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're looking at competitor market share for the last 18 months. Specifically, our alternative milk retail sales in the U.S. Makes sense. We're going from 18 months till today. So no forward-looking predictions here, but we're looking at milk share percentage across the bottom. And right away, I see that jump that you were talking about, where we moved from 1% share 18 months ago to 6% share 6 months ago. I mean, that's exciting growth. Unfortunately, between 6 months ago to today, we're still kind of hovering at that 6% number. So that's a bit concerning to me just right off the bat. And then taking a look at this broader market, in my framework, I'd asked the question about kind of how fragmented the market was or whether there was a few major players. Looking at this graph, it looks pretty fragmented, right? Milk is a smaller player, but they're certainly in the fight. I see that large Snack Co. has recently joined and has really been rapidly gaining share. It seems like Alternative Milk Co. 3 and Alternative Milk Co. 5 are also growing pretty rapidly. So when we're thinking about Milk in that kind of broader context, I'd love to understand a little bit more about what large Snack Co. and then Milk Co. 3 and Milk Co. 5 are doing that's allowing them to kind of capture the market so quickly.
Very much agree with that. You can see a very active market here. Curious what you think about private label. How do you think about the growth and what you've seen with that?
So when I'm thinking about private label, I'm thinking about like the Whole Foods brand of like
That's exactly
oat milk,
right.
365.
House brand, exactly.
Just looking at this, it's in the fight. It doesn't seem like it's really performing at the same level as some of these other competitors. Maybe there's something in that. Maybe people, because alternative milk is such a kind of new segment, so people really want to buy the milk that they trust from the manufacturers they trust.
Credibility.
Maybe it's also something to do with the type of customer that buys alternative milk. Alternative milk isn't just about the health benefits. Maybe it's also about this sense of almost a kind of premium product where you're doing something that's good for the world. It's also good for you. And so there's like that almost premium element to it. But that private label doesn't really excite me on the trajectory that it's on now.
Yeah, and knowing that Smilk is a premium positioned product, that might be a good sign too, to see that the private label isn't going to be taking over the market and that there's a lot of differentiation by brand. Well, great. Thank you for going through that. And I agree with you that we need to further dive into each one of these different competitors. Before we do that, I have a little bit of information on the company as well that we're going to flip to. And so, we haven't given you very much data to date, but we do have a little bit of data here on the company's U.S. business and their European business. I'd love to just pause on this slide for a second and contemplate that question around being able to hit our profitability target and just having a sense of what that total profit in the U.S. looks like and whether or not the target is reasonable.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be digging into some numbers here.
I can tell.
Okay, so what do we have here? We've Smilk financial data, revenue, profit margin, okay, and then percentage of Smilk total profit. Great. And then we've got the U.S. business, Europe business, and total business across the top. Okay, so we have a few numbers already in here. Total revenue, very helpful, and also profit margin percentage of that total revenue. So I'm thinking that's where I'll start, right? We can use that revenue and profit margin to give us total business percent of Smilk total profit. So 320 times 15%, we're looking at around 48 million. So that'll fill in that kind of lower right-hand box. And then we know the US business is 25% of Smilk total profit, right? So we can take that 48 million number and multiply it by that 25%. And that will give us around 12 million for that profit number in the US business. And then we want to understand revenue as well. So we know that that 12 million represents a 10% profit margin. So we can just go ahead and take that 12 million, multiply it by 10, and we're looking at 120 million in revenue.
That's great. It starts to give us some of the data that we need. I'm curious, just taking a step back before even filling out the rest of this, what do some of these numbers tell you on the page about the business?
Absolutely, yeah. The fact that Europe has such better margins is actually a source of faith for me. Like maybe as the US business starts to get more established and we build more relationships, start to get some economies of scale here, Milk has the ability to really grow their profit margins in the US as well. When we're thinking about this in the context of our larger question, right, which is our profit target, is that reasonable? With the margins that we're at right now in the US business, we would have to get to let's see, 12 million times 6, it's like 72 million profit, I want to say, and then 720 million in revenue. That's going to be a pretty big lift in a $4 billion alternative milk market. We looked at it from the Europe business perspective, so that's that 18% profit margin. We might be getting a little bit closer, but I don't think that we would still be at that 6x number. I'd be happy to do that math if it's helpful for the case, Jen.
No, I think we can actually move on, but I love how you're thinking about it. Spot on in terms of not quite getting all the way to 6x, even with this bump from Europe. I'm curious, what ways do you think that you might be able to achieve this higher profit margin that they're getting in Europe? You mentioned economies of scale, but I'm curious if there are other drivers.
So as they move into the US, they start to get a little bit more established, maybe start to get a little bit more brand name recognition. If Milk is a premium product, then we want folks to recognize the label, right? So that could be a part of it. Looking back at my framework here, increasing profit, right? Revenue and cost. So selling more product is one. Making the margins a little bit more agreeable is another, whether it's better relationships with the distributors, retailers, or establishing our own manufacturing plants here. Those are all options. And then price, right? Maybe as customers start to recognize Milk in store and understand a little bit about its value proposition, prices can go up a little bit while still maintaining a loyal customer base.
Makes a lot of sense. As you think about, now we have an aggressive growth target and profit target. As you think about the trade-offs between the two of those, how do you think about it and ultimately kind of where you might end up landing up if you raise price a lot but are also trying to get that growth?
Yeah, it is a trade-off, right? We had a conversation earlier about alternative milk being a more premium product. We saw that private label not performing super well. We know that Milk is positioning itself also as a premium brand within that premium product. If you can get people to believe that value proposition, then I think it's possible, right? You can raise the prices a little bit and folks are still willing to pay if they really believe that it's better. But as you're trying to grow and accumulate scale, there's a real question about how many customers within that relatively new alternative milk market are willing to pay top dollar. How much do they really care about having the best milk versus just having a milk? That would be something that I would definitely want to dig deeper into if Foodco was my client and this was Bain case.
Agreed. And this is based off of a real Bain case. And in that situation, we did dive deep into price. Here, we're not as much, but I agree it's an important topic. One thing that you had mentioned in your original hypothesis and the core drivers was the competitive positioning. So we do have one last piece of data that I'd love to flash up for you. And it's around how Smilk is positioned relative to the other players. So if I flip this up, I'd love for you to quickly orient me and tell me what are some of the insights you can pull from this page?
Sure. Okay, so we're looking at the U.S. alternative milk market, selection of competitor data. Okay, we've got share today, share change, top words associated. I love that. Customer satisfaction, awareness, and then average price. Great. We were just having a conversation about price. Okay, and across the top, we've got Milk and then some of the competitors that we talked about when we were looking at that kind of market share slide. So right off the bat, I'm zooming in on price because we just had that conversation. It looks like Milk might have a little bit of wiggle room, maybe. They're not super out of line with what else is in the market, but they might be able to increase a bit. I'm looking over now actually at Alt Milk 3, 5, and then Large Snack Co. They're all at or above Milk's prices, and they're all growing in double digits, right? So Alt Milk 3 is growing 16%, Milk 5 20%, Large Snack Co 21%. I'm looking at Alt Milk 5. One of the top words associated with their brand is best versus Milk, which is premium, but maybe not quite as good as best. So I know that my initial hypothesis was that Milk could be an attractive acquisition target. But actually, just looking at this page, I'm starting to get really excited about Alt Milk 3 and Alt Milk 5 in particular, right? The customer awareness of the brand is either low or medium, so there's some room for Food Co. to maybe move in there and help bump that up with their amazing branding team or their marketing team. They have great top words associated with the brand, and most importantly, they are growing in the double digits with share. So when I think about my initial framework for how to approach this question, I had that section of my framework, which is really about additional acquisition considerations, right? And one of those was, what are some of our other options to break into the market beyond Milk? And looking at this page, it seems like Alternative Milk 3 and Alternative Milk 5 would both be really strong potential other acquisition targets that I think we should take a closer look at before we step forward and really recommend that Food Co. proceed with this Milk acquisition.
I think that's great and fantastic observations. What are some of the things that you'd want to know about Alt Milk 3 and Alt Milk 5 to help further answer that question?
When I'm thinking about kind of some considerations I'd want to know for our Alt Milk 3 and Alt Milk 5, actually, can we flip back to that earlier
Great idea.
page? Yeah, so this is great. So we can see here, Alt Milk 3 and 5 are both pretty new entrants, right? And they've managed to capture a lot of the market really quickly. So I'd love to know a little bit more about what's behind that, how they've managed to create that growth, and whether it's something that's sustainable. What are their profit predictions or goals for the next 5 years versus that kind of 6x number for Milk? And then I'd also want to look at some of those additional acquisition considerations that I had in my initial framework, right? So potential synergies that Food Co. and Milk, or Food Co. and Milk Co. 5 and Milk Co. 3 could realize, what would be the price of those companies, cultural overlap, how customers view them, et cetera. It seems like there's a lot of fodder in here for great Bain case.
That's great. I'm so glad you had me flip back to this page because I agree. There's so much that you can learn from this, the fact that there are new entrants. So I'm going to take down the materials for a second, and I'd love just for us to summarize a bit of what we've learned and what you ultimately think, around the original key questions.
So I would recommend that Food Co. does not acquire Milk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that 6x profit number is reasonable for a couple of reasons. One, the market is only growing by 2x. That's about a $4 billion market. And given the current U.S. margins, if they wanted to capture a 6x profit, they would have to be taking in around $720 million in revenue in a $4 billion market. So that seems like an unreasonable lift. Even if they were able to increase their profit margins to the kind of European numbers, it would still require a pretty substantial market presence. And of course, now we're talking about that trade-off between a large market share and also a price increase. Those two things are tough to do in concert with each other. So I think Milk, probably not the right acquisition target for Food Co. However, in terms of next steps, there are other ways for Food Co. to enter the alternative milk market. I'm specifically thinking of Alternative Milk Co. number 5 and Alternative Milk Co. number 3 as potential acquisition targets.
Now, I'm curious, one thing that, it's a very, very practical recommendation to say that the profit margin target is difficult to achieve. One thing we might like to do is not only take back to the client other recommendations around other acquisition targets, but also maybe what do you need to believe? What would be an appropriate revision of the profit target? And so what do you think would be reasonable for us to bring back to them?
Okay, well, baseline, I would say baseline would be 2x because that's how much the market is going to grow. And I have some confidence based on that slide we saw of smoke versus competitors that they can at least maintain their market share, right? So
That's fair.
I would say 2x is baseline. I would say given their current margins versus Europe's margins were about double the US margins. So again, kind of rough estimates here. If they were able to double their profit margin, then we could put another 2x on top of that. So maybe we're looking at 4x as a more reasonable number for Milk in the next 5 years.
Olivia, this has been great. Thank you so much for going through this case with me. It's very reminiscent for me because it was based off of another consumer goods product that we actually looked at. And ultimately it did come down to price. And as you were saying earlier on, we did a lot of work around the consumer's willingness to pay. And for this particular brand, they were not willing to pay the prices that the brand was currently putting up. And so that gave us a lot of hesitation around the ability to have profit margin gains over the long run. So very reasonable recommendation on your part, and I had a great time. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jen. It was absolutely my pleasure.